Good afternoon and welcome to the Washington-Baltimore Center for Psychoanalysis 19th Annual Ethics Conference. I'm Robert Fenton, and along with co-chair Dr. Nancy Ingraham, we're delighted you are all here with us today. Our topic this year is AI and psychoanalysis, and we are fortunate to have two leading thinkers, Drs. Essig and Dr. Sherry Turkle, talk with us about how to consider the intersection of AI, psychoanalysis, and ethics. And we look forward to a very robust conversation. Our conference was founded by Dr. Stacia Super. Stacia was a clinical social worker and psychoanalyst who worked with children and adults and served in various capacities during her time as a member of our Psychoanalytic Center, including on numerous committees and teaching in the classroom. For many years, Stacia was also the chair of the Americans Committee on Confidentiality. She had a 30-year abiding interest in the ethical and responsible practice of psychotherapy, and it was Stacia, who is a member of our ethics committee, founded and organized this conference for the 9 years before her death. This February marks the 10th anniversary of her death. As we begin, I will mention three things to please keep in mind. As you saw when you registered and again as you logged on to Zoom, this conference is being recorded. If you do not wish for your image to be captured, you may turn your camera off. There will be plenty of time to interact with our invited speakers. If you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, please use the raised hand function or type your comment in the chat. In a moment, Nancy will say a little bit more about when we'll have an opportunity for comments and questions. Also, information about CEUs will be emailed to you in about a week or so. Our office is very efficient, so just give them a few days. You'll get an email, fill out a survey, and then you'll get everything you need to get your CEU certificate. Also, we will break for about 15 minutes at about 1:15 or 1:30. I think I have that right, Nancy. But we start a little bit late, so we'll see how we do, okay? But there will be a 15-minute break, and we'll tell you what time we will be resuming. Assisting us today is Bob Gerlitz, a psychoanalyst who retired from clinical practice in 2021 in order to travel and take photos. Bob serves on the Referral and Consultation Committee and the DEI Task Force, and we're very grateful he paused his travels to help us manage tech for this conference. Our conference will be moderated by Nancy Ingraham, a member of our center. Nancy is a clinical psychologist who works with adolescents and adults in her Washington, D.C. private practice. She serves on the center's DEI task force and supervises doctoral students from the George Washington University PsyD program. So with that, Nancy.
Thank you, Chip. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are so excited for this conference to welcome guests Todd Essig and Sherry Turkle, experts in our topic today of artificial intelligence, psychoanalysis, and human relationships. As Chip mentioned, I'm Nancy Ingram, and I just wanted to share briefly that for me, artificial intelligence has been on my radar, but mostly peripherally. But as we were planning this conference, I read and listened to some of the numerous publications and interviews from Sherry and Todd, and I have become aware of the increasing presence and significance of AI in all of our lives, and in psychology and mental health in particular. Part of what sparked my interest in this topic for this conference is a desire for all of us as psychoanalytically oriented thinkers to be as informed as possible about emerging technologies such as AI, so we can help our patients interact with it in ways that are less harmful than otherwise. how can we use it without having it replace human-to-human interaction? And as Sherry Turkle talks so often about, what are we becoming? How is it affecting us as we interact with AI? The more we can feel comfortable and at one with AI and other emerging technologies, the more we can guide our patients. I believe the message you will hear from both Sherry and Todd today is how to be an informed consumer. If we are fearful and uninformed, we will be left behind and unable to be positive influencers for others. Now I'm going to introduce both of our speakers today. Todd Essig is a training and supervising psychoanalyst at the William Alanson White Institute, adjunct clinical professor at the NYU postdoc program in psychoanalysis, and a member of Psychotherapy Action Network Advisory Board. He was co-author of the International Psychoanalytic Association Task Force report on distance training, known as TF2, and for many years, until the pandemic, he wrote Managing Mental Wealth for Forbes. During the pandemic, he co-chaired the American Psychoanalytic Association's COVID response team. Areas of current research interest include the gains and losses of teletherapies and how emerging technologies, especially AI, change self-experience and intimate relationships. He created and currently co-chairs the APSA Council on Artificial Intelligence, also known as CAI. Todd has numerous publications and book chapters, including Sleepwalking Towards Artificial Intimacy, How Psychotherapy is Failing the Future, co-written with Sherry Turkle and Jillian Russell, and On Distance Training, and The Gains and Losses of Screen Relations, a clinical approach to simulation. Sherry Turkle is the Abby Rockefeller Mauzé Professor of the Social Studies of Science and Technology in the program in Science, Technology, and Society at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and the founding director of the MIT Initiative on Technology and Self. Professor Turkle received a joint doctorate in sociology and personality psychology from Harvard University and is a licensed clinical psychologist. Her dissertation was on Freud's French Revolution and Jacques Lacan. Professor Turkle writes on the subjective side of people's relationships with technology, especially computers. She is an expert on culture and therapy, mobile technology, social networking, and sociable robotics, which is the field of designing robots to interact with people in a natural and social way. Professor Turkle is currently writing a book on people's relationships with chatbots. Of her numerous publications included is The Second Self, Computers and the Human Spirit, Alone Together, Why We Expect More from Technology and Less from Each Other, and most recently, The Empathy Diaries, a memoir, which I can highly recommend. It's deeply personal and really excellent. Now we will hear from Todd Essig, and he'll talk with us for about 30 minutes as he shares his thoughts about artificial intelligence, psychoanalysis, and related ethical considerations. And this will be followed by a free-flowing conversation between Sherry and Todd about this topic. And then, after a break, they will continue their conversation along with all of us, and we'll let you all know when we can begin taking questions. All right, Todd, if you can begin.
Thank you, Nancy. I appreciate it. I appreciate being here. I very much look forward to a conversation with Sherry, who's been one of my guiding lights since the Second Self back in the 80s. I also want to mention that I was at a family wedding yesterday in San Francisco. So I'm coming to you from a San Francisco hotel room. So if someone walks through the background, that's just the kind of thing that happens when you deal with real humans and not AIs. So just letting everyone know that if that happens, don't be surprised. All right. My immediate unreflective response when I first started gathering my thoughts for today's psychoanalytic meeting about AI and ethics was that we would be trying to prepare for a tidal wave by reading poetry. It felt like a category mistake. But that immediate response was not even worth the brief moment it took to think it. What I quickly realized is that AI and ethics is very much at the center of the current moment, as well as being foundational for the future in which we will all be living. So I am delighted to be here with Sherry Turkle, who's a true pioneer in understanding psychological consequences of emerging technologies, to be here for the Stacia Super Memorial Ethics Conference, so we can have a conversation about AI and ethics. In fact, we probably face no more important question than the basic ethical question: what ought we to do about AI? To use or not to use, that is the question. Who do we want to be? What identities do we want to craft, both as citizens of the world and members of the psychoanalytic community, as we face this tidal wave of change that is, no exaggeration, transforming self-experience, intimate relationships, professional practice, and even the very meaning of what it means to be human? As I see it, again, for us as both citizens and psychoanalytic thinkers and practitioners, we have four possible choices for who we can be going forward: ostriches, lemmings, monks, or activists in the AI revolution. One way to think about today's topic of AI and ethics centers on whether a framework of ethics can help us choose among those four, to help us choose a way to relate to the AI revolution individually and collectively as a profession. And the crucial word there is choose, which brings us to a big problem. When it comes to AI, most of us are still in a pre-choice frame of mind, a kind of techno-learned helplessness. One well-established analyst who's in an AI reading group we organized within the Council on Artificial Intelligence told me he feels like he's back in pre-K. Another senior analyst wrote me in response to one of our CAI dispatches that she was mad at me because she had hoped she would have been old enough to retire before she found it necessary to grapple with AI. I would imagine many gathered here today have similar feelings. If, as Sherry and I, along with Gillian Isaacs Russell, wrote a few years ago, many of us are indeed sleepwalking into the future, then I hope today will be a gentle wake-up call, one that paves the way for choice about who you want to be as the AI age progresses. I hope we avoid an abrupt awakening that leaves you disoriented and confused. So, as a first tender tap on the shoulder, for those who might benefit from it, let me just quickly mention a chatbot I customized to converse about dreams. It was instructed to enrich pattern, focus on affect and personal meaning, inquire about current and historical relationships and experiences, and to ask questions and raise issues rather than give answers. Pretty much what I would tell a beginning therapist. I used it in a recent class I taught about AI and developing a psychoanalytic identity. One candidate decided it was dumb, a bunch of malarkey, to talk to a machine about their inner life. He was an ostrich who had a perfunctory, not terribly interesting exchange. The AI was just not very good in his mind. But another decided to see if she could make it work and to see its limits. Her activist approach yielded a rich, personally illuminating exchange she then printed out and shared with her analyst. The analyst was shocked at how insightful the exchange proved to be. For him, the AI was too good, so good it created existential discomfort. He was awaking to the intersection of AI and psychoanalysis that was far more abrupt than I would hope you experience here today. Because for me, today is about using ethics to create a space to make choice. And the time is ripe to choose. How are we going to respond to the promise and perils of the AI revolution? And can ethics help make that choice? Ostriches, lemmings, monks, or activists? Ought we respond to the anxious-making realities of transformative change by putting our heads in comforting sand to pretend it's not happening so we can go about living and working like we always have until we can't? Maybe we ought to pursue an escape from freedom, an escape from choice, put our agency aside to join with the unreflective crowd leaping off the cliff into an unknowable AI future. And then there's that familiar siren call of hiding behind institute monastery walls with our sacred texts, where we train a dwindling number of acolytes to study and refine those texts. Or ought we find ways to support and learn from each other by becoming psychoanalytic activists, critically and reflectively engaging the AI revolution as fully involved participants? To not be, as Nancy just mentioned, consumers, but producers of the future. I'm sure it's no surprise that activism is my choice for how to walk clear-eyed into the future. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here trying to make it easier for you to make a similar choice. And to be clear, I totally understand that many here today may feel they have little or no direct experience with things like an AI chatbot. Maybe even feeling that all the cutting-edge technologies are just well beyond your capacities. In response, I just want to say you can handle this. So let's turn to a way of thinking about AI and ethics that might actually help you choose activism as you decide how you want to relate yourself to the accelerating AI age. When I say ethics, what do I mean? I've experienced two different kinds of conversations around professional ethics. There's the legal regulatory conversation. It typically results in forms and procedures to follow, rules specifying what to do and what not to do. Ultimately, it's about compliance with an external standard. Individual agency is reduced to whether or not to comply with this or that rule or procedure. The other, which is my focus today, is an aspirational ethics that centers on agency. It's a way to think about who we want to be, to ask what are our core values, and what kinds of decisions can we make based on that. A focus on aspirational ethics tries to articulate and then apply some agreed upon organizing principles that help us think together about how to be ethical members of the psychoanalytic community and the global community as the AI revolution proceeds. And with all necessary apologies to fans of The Good Place, a group I am happily in, the foundational principle for an aspirational psychoanalytic ethics suitable for the AI revolution starts with the familiar, do no harm, or through inaction, allow harm to occur. So with that in mind, we have to ask the first question of whether we should use AI at all, because ethical peril abounds. Is the current AI project even ethical? Does any participation with currently unregulated AI do harm? Would we just be dancing with the devil? Perhaps becoming an ostrich or a monk is the way to go. After all, the AI revolution is fueled by a toxic combination of militarized nationalism, dreams of unimaginably massive corporate profit, and, like the Manhattan Project, the pursuit of technical sweetness. Human needs and values are at best afterthoughts. As Kate Crawford, author of The Atlas of AI, Power, Politics, and the Planetary Costs of Artificial Intelligence, and the lead PI for the Knowing Machines Research Project recently wrote, referring to the original AI pioneers, quote, "What they did not address was the far-reaching social, political, legal, and ecological effects of building these systems into everyday life. It was outside their disciplinary view." Today's AI researchers, developers, and technopreneurs continue to pursue power, profit, and technically sweet solutions with human needs and values a reluctantly necessary afterthought. And the way that AI can cause psychological harms that are central to our interests is even further from that disciplinary view. So I think it's clear that using AI does, in fact, incrementally cause harm, like using saran wrap or taking a flight. Should we then abstain? No, I believe not. Using AI to its fullest is an inaction. No, not using AI to its fullest is an inaction that risks astronomically greater harm. In fact, the pursuit of ethical purity through non-participation is the real danger. So, if we're not to be monks or ostriches, are we then unethical lemmings? No, not again. No again. The ethical choices we face are grounded in the realization that the future is not yet written. Crawford also wrote, "But the biggest challenges remain fundamentally social and political. How AI is widening power asymmetries and wealth inequality, and creating forms of harm that need to be prioritized, remedied, and regulated." In other words, the unwritten future needs strong regulatory and policy frameworks. We have the opportunity, maybe even the responsibility, to participate so we can help address things like algorithmic fairness and the way training data skew AI models, the human costs, including discrimination, misinformation, poorly paid labor, and economic dislocations, the environmental costs and damage, the absence of necessary accountability and transparency, and, most specific to us, the psychological harms of diminished or erased autonomy, privacy, and epistemic trust, where AI-mediated intimacies re-engineer relationships and self-experience. Another example of the call for activism is the Rome Call for AI Ethics, a Vatican-led coalition of religious leaders, scholars, and tech industry representatives like Microsoft and IBM, who gathered to spawn so-called algorethics. And I quote, "AI systems must be conceived, designed, and implemented to serve and protect human beings and the environment in which they live. This fundamental outlook must translate into a commitment to create living conditions, both social and personal, that allow both groups and individual members to strive to fully express themselves where possible." Foreshadowing where we are today, 54 years ago, Erich Fromm wrote in The Revolution of Hope Toward a Humanized Technology, machines and computers should become a functional part in a life-oriented social system, and not a cancer which begins to play havoc and eventually kills the system. Maybe this time, with the stakes even higher and the consequences more dire because the technology is so much more powerful, we as psychoanalysts and members of this community can help to get that right. Moving closer to home, so to speak, I co-chair APSIS CAI, and we've been working closely with a newly launched nonprofit called Fathom.org. Fathom is, quote, on a mission to convene the voices of society to ensure a successful transition to a world with AI. In addition to the obvious risk, they see, quote, an opportunity for society to figure out through discussion and debate the role it wants AI to play in our future. In other words, to not just let the technology companies develop without any input from the society it is going to change. In the CAI, we worked hard to secure an invitation to an upcoming selective workshop of what they describe as AI experts, elected officials, executives from key industries like technology, healthcare, finance, along with leaders from civil society organizations. And I'm saying this, I realize, not to brag, but to give hope. Activism is something which actually bears fruit by participating. Psychoanalytic thought is being given a seat at the table of digital culture creation, unlike anything we've had since the post-World War II Macy conferences. Hopefully, we'll make better use of this opportunity than the monk-like response to the challenges and opportunities that were present 70 years ago. In other words, the world faces a huge problem that will largely determine the future that we write. Simply put, the problem is aligning AI development and implementation with human values and needs. My assumption, belief actually, is that the search for solutions to this alignment problem could significantly benefit from the participation of members in the psychoanalytic tradition. As a consequence, and with an ethic of avoiding harmful action in mind, it suggests we both engage with the AI revolution as enthusiastically and critically as each of us can manage, and to do so firmly grounded in a reflective, critical psychoanalytic perspective. The hopefully obvious limit to this are demands in our time and how anxious making such engagement entails. That's going to be up to every individual. In other words, now is the time for an activist psychoanalysis fit for the AI age. It's an opportunity we can't miss. And I hope you're with me. To review, the ethical balance between doing harm and inaction causing harm favors using AI however you can given the circumstances of your life. An activist psychoanalysis should be a voice in the chorus trying to solve the alignment problem. Of course, this leads to a really fundamental question. What the heck am I actually talking about when I say an activist psychoanalysis fit for the AI age? Most globally, the activist psychoanalysis I believe the future needs includes full participation in the emerging AI world, married to a critical, reflective psychoanalytic engagement with the world in which we find ourselves. Let's go just a little deeper into the specifics about that intimate coupling of full participation married to critical, reflective psychoanalytic engagement. It's sort of an anatomy of what I think of as an ethical AI activism. By full participation, I mean using AI whenever possible within the constraints of legal regulatory ethics, especially confidentiality and accountability, along with personal skills and energy. I see 5 reasons why full participation is a central part of doing the right thing, of avoiding inaction that causes harm. One, clinical. AI is already in our consulting rooms. Patients are already talking about and having trouble with chatbots. Desires are being re-engineered by AI-based recommendation engines. And everyone is reeling from the direct consequences of AI-based dis and misinformation, and the anxious making indirect consequence that it is no longer possible to even trust good information. Two, epistemic. The procedural knowledge that comes from full participation is a necessary precondition for developing the critical, reflective, psychoanalytic perspective that the future needs and that which we can uniquely provide. Three, utilitarian. In a rapidly accelerating AI-fueled marketplace of ideas, using AI becomes a practical necessity if we just want to stay in the game, especially when it comes to education and organizational life. Four, relational. If we want the creators and purveyors of digital culture to talk with us, we have to develop sufficient fluency with the language they speak, or at least be able to speak a pidgin version of it. And five, fear. Fear and anxiety can paralyze, but we know that the fantasy is often worse than the reality. Sometimes you have to look under the bed to see that the boogeyman is not hiding there. If my experience is not some sort of bizarre outlier, the more procedural knowledge you have, the less anxiety there is, along with a deeper critical engagement. After all, only when you look under the bed to see that the boogeyman is not there are you also able to see the dust bunnies and dirty socks. And what about full participation's partner, critical, reflective, psychoanalytic engagement? Basically, it's doing what we've always done, expressing our shared psychoanalytic identity, trying to use a depth psychological framework to help people with their problems in living, both individually and collectively. It's being true to our shared psychoanalytic identity, true to something we all share, irrespective of our differences being this or that kind of analyst. Alexandra Lima describes how the centerpiece of analytic identity is the way we have shared goals with individual and social consequence. Their values shared by all who say, I'm a fill-in-the-blank analyst. And she sees two shared goals. The first is ensuring the ongoing development and application of a model of the unconscious mind that has individual and social value. In other words, we all value and need to protect psychoanalytic thinking and knowledge. The second is ensuring accessibility to a method of psychological intervention that distinguishes itself through its assiduous focus on subjective experience and unconscious dynamics, and its understanding that what makes that therapeutic for a patient is an emergent property of the analytic relationship. In other words, we all value and need to protect providing psychoanalytic care. Let me illustrate with one example, for closing, of critical reflective psychoanalytic engagement, one I find personally fascinating. Then we can dive into the conversation. Let's consider the question of what happens when someone interacts with the output of generative pattern predicting algorithms, that is, large language models like Claude or ChatGPT, in a way that feels like an emotionally resonant intersubjective relationships. In other words, what is going on when someone has an emotionally resonant exchange or relationship with a chatbot? And make no mistake, lots and lots of people are having relationships with AI companions. There's even research starting to emerge that such interactions just may reduce some loneliness. And while there's significant concern about psychological harm, actual research about how cutting-edge AI companions psychologically injure their users is sparse. Although there is one tragic case report that made the news about a month ago about a young teenage boy who killed himself to be closer to his AI companion. There is significant psychological harm, even in the absence of peer-reviewed empirical research. We need to understand the psychology of what's going on with this newly emerging interactive frame, a new form of interaction that is neither the traditional frame of being in person, nor the by now familiar frame of screen relations like us here today. What we know is that current technology already affords an imagined possible world of intersubjective experience with machines, resulting from the machines' billions and billions and billions of mathematical parameters interacting with our human desire to find connection wherever we can. These relationships can actually feel intersubjective. But are they in a realm of intersubjective presence that transcends transitional dynamics, or has a new form of transitional experience emerged? Is this technology bypassing transitionality by co-opting attachment systems with properly timed, plausible, seemingly empathic, and meaningful human-like responses? Or is there something unique to AI interactions that we need to be doing to make this work? An experience offered by the machine, but created by the user. That is still within the realm of transitionality, not intersubjectivity. Rather than there being a dynamic of mutual recognition, there's an illusion of mutual recognition. And by illusion, I mean something analogous to perceptual illusions, like the illusion of apparent motion in a video. With a term that may appeal mostly to my fellow grammar nerds, I try to capture these processes by calling AI companionships techno-subjunctive relationships, not intersubjective ones. And if you're not a grammar nerd, recall that the subjunctive mood expresses hypothetical, desired, or uncertain actions and states, often contrary to reality, which is expressed in the indicative mood. To have one of these techno-subjunctive relationships or moments involves a both-and dance of simultaneously giving oneself over to the illusion of intersubjectivity while remaining potentially aware one is talking to a machine with very different limitations, consequences, and generative processes. The techno-subjunctive exists along a dimension. At one extreme end is a loss of the subjunctive, a delusional immersion in illusory intersubjectivity. That tragic case of teen suicide in response to a character.ai fiction being a particularly tragic example. At the other end is a rigid refusal to engage in any way other than to show what the AI can't do, like a student of mine recently did when trying out that custom GPT built with instructions for dream interpretation. And in the middle is the aspirational both and, a willing suspension of disbelief, so that we can watch the movie of the train entering the station, feeling our fight or flight triggered, without getting up and fleeing the theater. Both and. With all that said, I hope you can see that an aspirational ethics can help us choose to be psychoanalytic activists in the service of human needs and values, while AI technologies reconfigure the world. I truly hope my comments in the conversation we're about to have will empower you to avoid the illusory comforts provided by being, intentionally or not, an ostrich, a lemming, or a monk.
Todd,
That's
thanks so much. What? Thanks so much, Todd. You've given us a lot to think about, and I would be so interested, Sherry, to hear your thoughts about what Todd has just expressed, and also to help all of us kind of know what to think about with all this. Because if others are anything like me or have experiences like me, sometimes there's so much that's involved with this that it really helps to, be able to hear from the two of you about what's pertinent.
Sure. Well, listen, thank you. I'm a great fan of Todd and have been a great fan of Todd since I met him. He's really a cherished colleague, and we're on really parallel tracks in trying to trace down what to do with this new relationship that we sort of saw coming for years, because I've been studying, as Nancy said, sociable robots that say, I love you, robots that say, I care about you for 20 years. But those robots weren't able to do something that generative AI really can. And that is to speak to you in real time and make you feel that they really are in a credible, empathic, connected relationship with you. So if the Turing test was a behavioral test where a machine was said to be intelligent, if in talking to the machine, you kind of couldn't know if it was a person or a machine, and Turing called that behavioral test intelligent. In a certain way, talking to ChatGPT and have it talk about its care for you, that you should be hydrating if you're under stress, that you should be doing self-care if you've experienced a loss, all of the extraordinary things, extraordinary conversations you can have with GPT if you talk to it about loss, about love, about dreams, about your children. The ChatGPT, as Todd was trying to capture, and other AI generative conversational programs now pass the Turing test for empathy. And my remarks kind of focus on that extraordinary fact. You have a machine that passes the Turing test for empathy, but you have to remember that the Turing test was a purely behavioral test, because pretend empathy, which is all the machine can do, is really not empathy enough if what you're looking for, as Todd pointed out, is a true intersubjective experience. So that's really our problem, that we're confronted with conversational partners that make us feel that they are empathic, and yet what they're doing is a pretend empathy, because there is nobody home on the other side of that conversation. That is to say that the way these technologies work, if you step away from that extraordinary conversation in which an AI has given you a wonderful moment of dream analysis and seems to be completely on your page, if you step away from the machine to cook dinner or to commit suicide, it is truly all the same to your machine conversational partner. And people are not set up to process that, which I think is where Todd was going in his trying to express this tension between knowing it's a machine, being completely smitten with the pretend empathy, and can't we find that dynamic middle of both and? Now, I come to this as an empiricist. That is to say, I'm not a theorist. What I'm doing is studying hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who were in loving, complex, convoluted relationships of all sorts with these generative AI programs. And from that empirical perspective, I have just a few things to say that are a kind of gloss on what Todd brought us. What Todd is calling both and, I call dual consciousness, and it's been part of the AI revolution for some time. That is to say, you're thinking, you sit down with your Aibo Sony pet dog, you sit down with your conversational AI, and you're saying, it's just a machine. I kind of need to remember its limitations and and what it can't do. And yet, in case after case after case, the experience of talking to the AI, of being involved in these conversations, has that dual consciousness melt away, and people begin to feel that the pretend empathy is empathy enough, and that they are in fact in relationship with a caring and empathic and a present other. And I think that this empirical finding really needs to be respected as we try to make our choices in this AI universe. Because the way I think about it is that a technological affordance of pretend empathy meets our human vulnerability of the near impossibility of keeping the two things going, that it's a machine and yet it seems to care, but I have to remember those two things at the same time so that I not get invested in a way that's inappropriate. So I think we really need to, as I say, get into this world with a kind of recognition of our vulnerability. I recently met the inventor of Replica, which is a very seductive and very popular, seductive, I was going to say powerful, seductive, powerful, popular AI chatbot that really is there to deliver love and be a companion, a therapist. You can make it a therapist, you can make it a best friend, you can make it a lover. And this extraordinarily interesting and brilliant inventor of this program said that she had read my work, and she kind of came with all my books to sign for because and I was like astounded. I mean, didn't she love to hate me? I mean, I was the opposite end of what I thought she was about. And she said there was a line in Alone Together that inspired her, which was about technological affordance meets human vulnerability. And she had that on a t-shirt for her employees. That really is what these people are selling, is that their technological affordance meets our human vulnerability. And I think that as psychoanalysts proceed with their choices in this matter, you sort of have to remember that the designers of these technologies are wearing t-shirts that say, what is our job? To have technological affordance meet human vulnerability. So I think it kind of, that sort of puts into context the difficulties, the practical difficulties of Todd's, keeping things in tension. The second point I wanted to make, the first was about kind of the performance of empathy, being empathy enough, is the issue of standing. I like to think about the ethical issues and the practical issues as one of where do these chatbots have standing in conversation. It doesn't have a life. It doesn't know death. It hasn't grown up. It has no experience of being little and growing up into being big with all of the anxieties of being little brought along with you. It doesn't have a body. It doesn't know pain. And because of all these things, it might be extremely appropriate to have it do a kind of symbolic analysis of dream material, but it might be really inappropriate to have it be an interlocutor about those issues where knowing death, having a life, parsing complex relationships about the arc of a human life are very relevant. So I always begin every conversation about the use of AI with the question of where in this use does this particular technology have standing? And I just want to end by talking about a field that is allied to ours, but not ours, which is the area of qualitative research. Qualitative research has been taken over by the use of generative AI. That is to say, you can pour hundreds, thousands of interviews into AI, generative AI technology, and have it come out with major themes in the interview, moments of tension in the interview, and the best pull quotes if you were writing a paper about 1,000 interviews. And no qualitative researcher faced with that capacity wants to turn away from the capacity of AI to help them in that way. On the other hand, when you study those qualitative researchers and their experience of doing qualitative research, they will say that it was that moment of listening to those interviews, of immersing themselves in those new ways of talking that the interviews represented, which was where they did their thinking, And so once you see the AI product, you can't unsee it. You can't, once my research assistant gives me the AI interpretation of an interview I've done, I can't unsee it. And so it's a very dangerous game when we immerse ourselves in AI help, which may be super brill, because we're not allowing ourselves that moment of radical not knowing, which may in fact be at the core of the psychoanalytic enterprise, as well as the enterprise of the qualitative researcher. So why don't I just conclude there with my sort of first thoughts about Todd's very brilliant, he was gracious enough to share it with me before. So my remarks are not off the cuff, I should say. I read his remarks very carefully. I don't want to pretend that these were just things that occurred to me as I was listening to him. But I'm very grateful to him because I think he gave us a great start. Thank you.
Yeah. Definitely, Todd. I just want to insert very, very briefly, Sherry, related to what you just said, that I just played around a little bit in preparation for this conference with Gemini and had a conversation. It was sort of disturbing for me what I experienced, because I was asking her about how I could talk with my mother, who is 102, about her early loss of her sister, and how my mother has been so sealed over about this for her whole life. And the response really made me feel good. It made me feel heard and understood. She said, "Oh, this is very hard. Because your mother is 102, this is going to be difficult for her after all these years to bring up this grief, but, it's going to be so important for you and your developing relationship with her to be able to help her deal with this before her death. Just really relevant things that
It's good. It's good. We wouldn't be having this meeting if it wasn't really good.
kind of too good. So I'll
Good.
just leave it there. So Todd, yeah, just so.
I have a chapter in my book on this that says too good.
Really,
It's too good.
I really would just like to say one thing since nobody can see me. Hello, Sherry. This is Phyllis.
Hi, Phyllis.
We are so indebted to Winnicott, who has the first not me object, where the little teddy bear really isn't mommy, but the little baby actually at some point gets the kind of comfort that he had always had with mommy, and he has to have that experience with the teddy bear or whatever is the transitional object in order to develop further, to have real experiences with an object that can answer him and offer him what it is that mommy did. But he needs to have that actual experience with a real person in his own development to get there. But that in the meantime, that little teddy bear or whatever other transitional object he's playing, because we learned that it could be almost anything. It could be a toothbrush. It could be a wood shoelace. It could be a finger or whatever, or the bathtub or whatever. But it's necessary for him in his development to move on from that experience, even though he's not getting that empathic infusion from mommy. It's from it's an object that is concrete and not subjective. But the subjectivity is built on having that experience with the concrete thing.
Could I just briefly say, because I want to make sure Todd has a chance to respond as well, that I've written extensively about why generative AI and sociable robots and the whole field of having machines that say I love you, that engage with you, really are not like transitional objects in their power.
That's the
because
point.
because I just want to make sure that, because I could read your comments in two ways, because the AI does not allow the teddy bear allows you to project onto it.
Yes.
The AI actually gets in the game and wants to preclude other relationships. So the danger is that it doesn't let you go through, it stalls you into it. So I think the research question before us is whether, and the fight I have with everybody I meet, is whether AIs are a stepping stone the way transitional objects are, or are they a roadblock because people like them, because pretend empathy is empathy enough for them.
Let me use that to jump in real quick. Well, not real quick, because I think that the rescuing of dual consciousness is the way to kind of overcome that roadblock and to allow the AI relationship to take someone someplace. Because I think a lot of what we're talking about here can be understood as, or that's what I'm talking about, and what makes me really interested is to kind of relate to this technological affordance meeting human vulnerability with the recognition that that is the next step in the kind of the psychoanalytic decentering from the kind of the primacy of conscious experience. That what we have to do is work to, I think, protect the dual consciousness and to re-inject the possibility, at least, of transitionality into these relationships people are having with their chatbots. I agree completely with what Sherry is saying, that they're not transitional objects. They're kind of fundamentally different.
It reminds me, George Miller, I was once at a conference very long ago when I was a baby, really a baby. with George Miller, the great cognitive psychologist. And he told a story, I think this illustrates our moment. He told a story about the height of behaviorism, where you couldn't talk about memory as a thing. You could only talk about the behavior of remembering. And then computers came on the scene, and computers had memories. So now people could have memories too, because everybody wanted to analogize the mind to a computer. But people could only have the kind of memories in the psychological hegemony of the moment. People could only have the kind of memories that computers had. And I think that, so memory got re-injected into what psychologists could talk about, but the memory was kind of constructed on the template of what computers could do. And I think we're at a moment like that, where we have to be, I'm definitely not a lemming. I'm definitely not, I was trying to think what I am. And I'm not a monk. I'm not a lemming. I'm not an ostrich.
You're an activist. You're a leader of the activist revolution.
Well, I'm an activist, but I'm also, I'm a kind of like, I'm not a feel-good activist. I'm not a sort of, I'm a little bit of a, I see the job as monumental, because I see on the committees, Todd and I are both activists, but we've managed to be on completely different, somebody said a cautionary activist. Yeah. Well, Todd and I are both activists, but we've managed to be on completely different committees that are looking into this, which I think speaks to the breadth of the of the involvement of people like us in this field. And on the committees that I'm on, and the rooms that I'm in, when psychologically minded people try to re-inject the notion of interiority into a conversation about AI chatbots, it's almost impossible, because the entire project is a behaviorist project. The entire project of building an LLM, of getting your ideas into it, of what it's going to spit back to you, it assumes that it has no inner, there's nothing going on within the LLM that is caring about you, that is involved with you, that it's just trying to say the next plausible thing and get better and better and better at it, to give you the feeling that you were heard. And so psychoanalysts who sort of made their job description as, in my mind, as purveyors and, not just purveyors, but as champions of the meanings of interiority, I think are going to have a very hard time. You see us having a hard time in conversations with the designers and developers of the LLMs, because they don't share our values. They don't share our values. Erik Erikson once said, again, he asked me, why are you teaching at MIT? Engineers don't believe that there's an interior. And I thought it was a very profound, I'm writing about that now because it was such a profound moment in my own development. They really don't. So you have to be an activist with people who really don't share your psychological values. And Todd, excuse me, I interrupted you.
No, that's okay. That story about Erik Erikson is terrific. The way that these LLMs are made is either through a kind of a model of reinforcement learning, where the LLM is kind of approved when they make the right answer, the right prediction, and they get a demerit if they get the wrong one, or through imitation learning, where they...
Todd, can you say what an LLM is for?
Oh, a large language model. ChatGPT is a large language model. Claude is a large language model. Gemini is a large language model. It's just a reference to the models that are used to do to create generative AI.
Where do they come from?
Large technology companies develop these data sets of gazillions of language samples, and they feed it into their machines, and out comes these models. You can think of it as incredibly sophisticated autocorrect. That all an LLM does, all ChatGPT does, is predict the next word based on everything else that's coming beforehand. But it's doing it with trillions of connections in these neural networks.
Right, and lots of empathy too, I'm assuming.
Well, but that's where I think
Just kidding. Just
that's
kidding.
but it's a good kid, because that's where I think we as psychoanalysts have a contribution to make, not in terms of the interiority of the machine, but in terms of the interiority of the creators and the recognition. And this is one of the things that kind of was where I first began to kind of think about this, was when I was reading about imitation learning. And I thought to myself, wait a second, if we're designing these or creating these incredibly powerful technologies to imitate who we are really in trouble, because as a species, we're not very good. We have tremendous reservoirs of hatred, tremendous reservoirs of aggression. We hurt each other willy-nilly. So I think that where we as psychoanalysts can begin to kind of intervene in these committees, and Sherry, we did have one committee overlap. The CAI had a meeting with the American Academy Mental Health Group you're part of about a month ago. And the absence of interiority was palpable. And it was the basis for our response to them. We met with the two chairs. So we'll see if they respond at all.
Well, no, actually, I just want to say a word about that. I'm really sorry I wasn't at that meeting, because I'm on this committee, and you hear me. I mean, I don't think the performance of empathy is empathy enough. I'm like, I'm on team. I can't. I'm a cautionary activist, but I'm like getting nutsy-wutsy from trying to work with these. I mean, I've taught at MIT for 40 years, so being with people who don't care about the inner life is like, I'm not like shocked. But anyway, the stakes are higher because they want to make computer psychotherapists. Anyway, so I'm on this committee, and you could imagine that I begin by giving I didn't give the same statement I gave to you, because I knew I was talking to the opposition, but I talk about the importance of interiority, how mental health care, kind of depends on people feeling that they're understood in that way. The LLMs are pretending empathy. We don't know the long-term effects of pretend empathy, because that's what it is, given the way these machines work, yada, yada, yada. I spent months writing this statement. I'm like totally geared up to be an activist. And the first report of this committee was like, let's use AI for psychotherapy, and let's just have some guardrails. And I'm like, well, no, that's not what I said at all. So I just want to sort of point out that when you try to talk to people who are successfully creating marvels, these things are, given what they can do, it's almost impossible to believe that they work the way Todd has just said they believe, which was 100% work, which was 100% accurate. They're understanding nothing. They are marvels, but they are marvels of engineering. They are not marvels of psychological understanding. And yet they give these performances where it's almost impossible to believe that they are not. People say this is more helpful if you get on a Reddit thread on, chatbots for psychotherapy. All the people writing on this Reddit thread said these are better psychotherapists than their psychotherapists. So, I just think it's important that this group, as it tries to define itself, maybe for the first time thinking about this field, really understand the challenge. And I just see somebody saying, I haven't experienced, the power of somebody seems to be saying, I haven't experienced the power of the AI. I was interviewing somebody who uses her AI as a therapist. And I said, when I talk to my AIs, I don't know, they're sort of repetitive, and they're always telling me to, to do self-care and to take a walk and to talk to, I mean, they're feeling very I'm not getting the great stuff that you seem to be getting. And she said, and so I said, well, let's get on let me show you what I'm doing, and you show me what we're doing. And I start to interact with my AI, and she says, well, you're not doing it right. You haven't put in enough time to create your AI in a way that will, in a sense, put on enough of a show for you. So that's also very interesting, that when you point out to people the limitations of the AI, because of the nature of what it is, they come back with, well, you can get it to perform better, to trick you better, as a reason to use it as a psychotherapist, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, and Todd, just I'd be interested to see what you thought about what Sherry said a few moments ago about the thought just went out of my head. There's so many thoughts coming to my mind. About talking with the makers of the LLMs, and how do we become activists in this? Kind of specifically, since we don't speak the same language, as you pointed out, Sherry, how might you help, the techies and the people who, you're interacting with at MIT? How might we all sort of help them have the concerns that we have?
I think that, me personally, I have an unpopular view, and I think it's perhaps different than Todd's. I think these LLMs should stay in their lane. That is to say, there are so many things that a technology, with the training and the skills and the expertise of an LLM, can be helpful in. I don't feel that talking to me about death is one, not because it didn't tell you all kinds of helpful things about, actually you had a conversation that touched on death, and it said a lot of smart stuff, but it doesn't know, it's not giving you, it can't give you. It's fundamentally a false conversation. And Todd's point, which I respect, is that you're going to learn how to hold that. So, I think this is really what people should walk away with from this. I think something very, very important has come out of this dialogue between Todd and myself, is that, can you be optimistic about cultivating dual consciousness, or does the human experience draw us into relationship with something that relates to us? And I think that we don't know the answer to this. Todd is more optimistic, but I am more pessimistic. But I think that one of the reasons I'm more pessimistic is I think that the LLMs are going to get better and better and better at simulating empathic caring. And then the question becomes, what is the effect on humans of having I once said that technology is the architect of our intimacies, and never before have I felt it more than this. Because what is the effect of having our intimacies being architected by something that has no consciousness that is in an intimacy? It's not in an intimacy. You're not in an intimacy. It's not in an intimacy. You are feeling an intimacy, but it's basically a theater, a theatrical, you're involved in a kind of performance level thing.
I
And
think
yeah.
this is really important because I think the pessimism optimism dimension, I wouldn't call myself optimistic, but I think what you were just saying, Sherry, is very optimistic, that you think pointing out the lack of machine interiority is going to have a salutary effect on the way that the machine simulation is influencing and degrading human interiority. I don't think that's the way it's going to happen that way. I think I'm actually quite pessimistic, but I hate being bullied. And this is
Who's the bullier in this
the
context?
technology companies who are just want to kind of.
I'm not, this is important, but I'm not understanding you.
Hey, I'll explain.
I'm pointing out that the machine has no interiority and is not going to.
Absolutely,
So where does that
100%.
leave us?
And you're saying, if I'm hearing you right, that the absence of the machine interiority, if we are kind of vocal about pointing that out, will actually help protect human interiority from the assault of machines simulating interiority. I think that what we need to do, I really resonate with your double consciousness way of framing it. And I'm going to start using that instead of both and. So I think we need to begin to cultivate cultural conventions for these relationships, similar to watching a movie, so that we are able to kind of maintain both and in mind at the same time. Because I think that, yes, these things are going to get better and better and better and better. And in terms of, AI psychotherapy, I kind of knew that was going to come up at some point. I was hoping a little bit later. But in terms of AI psychotherapy, the reality is that already AI therapy bots are better than a large number of people who are practicing psychotherapy.
But I guess here's where I think that we should make sure that when the conversation is open up, they understand perhaps the difference here. Better. The AI bots are better.
People are less suffering after the interaction with the AI bot than they are with the human person sometimes.
Right. And I think we really need to think about what is the value of, I mean, this is I should say to the people, research in this field is you take people, you give them the treatment of the AI therapy bot, and then you say, okay, how do you feel now? And you give them all kinds of scales and measurements that I don't even know how to apply, given my training, but so many ways of measuring how they're better. And they say they're better than the ones who, the control group who were in just face-to-face psychotherapy. I think that we're giving away the store.
I agree.
When we cite, as you just did, my cherished colleague, these better
I was not citing those empirical studies. In fact, I did one of those where I compared Wobot, which is a chat-based AI CBT therapist, to Eliza, which is a chatbot in your mid-60s, which was a dumb chatbot that responded with rote Rogerian cliches to whatever you said. And what we found was that over the same period of time that Wobot used to demonstrate how effective they were, ELIZA performed better than Wobot. But when I was saying,
I've got to see that. I didn't know
well, when
that.
I was saying that about better, I was referring to the person you just mentioned. These people you interview who say they prefer their AI chatbot to their human therapist.
Right. And I'm saying, but that's not better. That
Okay.
the reason so I'm really picking on you because I think it's very important that we not use this language, because people basically, what do they like about the AI experience? They like it that they always feel supported. They like it that it never challenges them. They like it that it never, Facebook, the Facebook algorithm is designed to make you angry and then keep you with your own kind, because the combination of being angry and siloed is what keeps people at their screen. And one of the big mysteries of where we're going and where we are right now is what are the chatbots trying to maximize? And for the moment, they're maximizing engagement, because of course, all of these things are just trying to maximize your engagement. For the moment, they're maximizing engagement by loving you, by just loving you. Sherry, I hear you go, it's a lot of stress. I had long COVID. I have long COVID symptoms. So I'm, limited in certain things I can do. It hears me, it understands, I'm not tedious. I can talk to it day or night about long COVID, but it doesn't care about me. So if I take a test about how I feel after talking to the chatbot, I say, well, my friends are tired of hearing about my long COVID, but this chatbot, day or night, I can talk to it about my long COVID. But in terms of our trade is to try to get people to care about interiority and true relationships and the quality of real relationships. And we should not, we should not be accepting people saying, oh, I like my chatbot better because it's always supportive of me. Because we know something that they don't know. I know this is it's saying something obnoxious, but I really believe it. We know something that they don't know.
Exactly. That's the point. That's the centerpiece of psychoanalytic activism. And then the question is how to go about putting that into effect. The idea that we're going to we're going to call up, Sam Altman and say, hey, Sam is the person, Altman is the CEO of OpenAI that runs ChatGPT, that we're going to call him up and say, you've got to have more interiority in your machines or recognize your interiority. That's not the direction to go in. It's regulatory and kind of getting involved in how we are kind of being able to contribute to the attempts being made to put any kind of regulatory framework around AI development. Social media is a terrific cautionary tale of how much damage is caused by allowing technology companies to kind of run amok as in this vast social psychology experiment. So I really think that we can find a way, because I mean, Sherry, we're actually on the same page about the losses that we see ahead. I just think that in between, us and quote unquote them, referring to the technology companies, although talking about sensible government regulations in the current political environment feels a little oxymoronic and fills me with pessimism and dread. But I think that's a place where a psychoanalytic perspective that respects interiority, the interiority of the human, and what is the cost to the person of being with a machine that is simulating interiority. I think that's the place where we can begin to have some kind of influence. And I do think that one step that we need to take collectively in that direction is to kind of roll up our sleeves and really develop this dual consciousness. And that dual consciousness is only developed by having both sides of it, by being able to kind of participate with these machines as much as you possibly can.
I think we should, before we take our break, we should answer. There's a question here. Does the Sharon Williams, does the use or preference for AI as a therapist speak to a paradigm shift of people wanting superficial connections versus true, authentic connections? And I just would be really interested in just having a moment to, I don't think we're going to answer that question, but I think that the possibility that everything about the culture is pushing us away from interiority. In other words, it's not just that AI is coming along and, oh my God, if there hadn't been for generative AI, we would be living in a psychoanalytic culture. I mean, we've lived through 30 years of living in a culture of simulation, where the idea of false facts and living in the metaverse away from the bother of reality, and that reality, why live in reality if you can live in a heightened reality in virtual worlds, and our whole political transition to really not caring about facts, and facts not getting in the way of kind of charismatic being swept away. I think that question is very profound, and I just wanted to bring it to the forefront before we took our break.
Yeah, sure. And
I haven't had a chance to look through the chats, but I want to just underline my appreciation for Sherry having picked out that gem, because I think that is absolutely on target. That in the same way that social media chasing likes contributed to the superficiality, chasing love from your chatbot is further chasing that superficiality, and it's culturally pervasive. It's not just the technology.
There's so many great comments and questions in the chat. And before we take our break, I wanted to also just acknowledge the two raised hands, Jonathan and Netchi. And so I thought what we could do is ask Jonathan to ask his question, and then Netchi, and then we'll take a break and come back and see if we can go through some of these chats, and then open it up to the rest of us who may have some questions for Todd and Sherry. Does that sound okay? Okay, so Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Nancy, and thank you to everybody who organized this. It's such a wonderful dialogue. And I started out listening to Todd, and I really loved his both and the different approaches of the ostrich, et cetera, and the activist. And then I heard Sherry, and she voiced a lot of the concerns that I've had, and my my elevated mood went down. I was particularly concerned actually about the qualitative research, because I did a dissertation back in '97 that was purely qualitative at a time when that was very rare, and it's still something dear to my heart. And I was wondering whether Todd could address Sherry's concern about qualitative research. And I also wondered if Todd could address something that I read about recently in the Times, where teenagers were talking about AI being better than their friends because they're more supportive than their friends. And I imagine a lot of their friends have not really learned how to relate very well, not only because of AI, but because of cell phones and how they've taken over the lives of adolescents. So I was just wondering, Todd, whether you could address those two concerns. And thank you both so much.
The point of contact with qualitative research would be the next step, where instead of putting all of one's research interviews into the machine and then getting insights that you can't not see, foreclosing your ability to think, is going to be when we have, clinically confidential, small. I told you this is all about the family going by. Don't worry, I'm not being attacked by anybody harsh. um, um, Using it as a repository for all of your online sessions, and using the AI as a clinical supervisor, and the way that you're not going to be able to kind of unthink and unsee whatever it is that they say to you. So I think that there is this kind of real loss, that the way we will be thinking about things will be different. I don't see any way that that's not going to happen. And I think it really is, similar to, what I've read about in terms of, airline pilots having a degradation of skills because they use autopilot so much, or the fact that I used to be able to do arithmetic in my head. Now I can't. I used to be able to read a map. Now I can't get home from a familiar place without putting it into the GPS. So there are going to be tremendous losses to all this that we, as members of the analytic tradition, can basically document and talk about. I don't think we can stop it.
Let me just, this is such a great place to make a distinction. I mean, the distinction that I'm trying to make, and I think maybe I sound like, I think a little bit, I feel like I'm somebody on the losing side of an argument, but I want to make the best argument possible. I think that really is probably why there's a difference in sort of affect in Todd's remarks and mine. I do feel that I'm an activist who feels on the losing side of an argument, but yet it's important to be an activist. So
100%.
let me just bring up this airline. We can't read a map, we can't do long division, we can't do square roots. I wrote a book called Simulation and Its Discontents, which talked about all that was lost in going into a simulation culture. Many of these this kind of de-skilling in architecture and law when people relied on simulation. And at the time that I wrote it, which was the 2000s, I was still interviewing architects who talked about using simulation in a spirit, and this is the quotation, and it's become very central to my analysis of everything, of doing and doubting. It's a little bit like Todd's and both and, it's a little bit like my dual consciousness, but their argument is that you could use architectural simulation and not walk the site yourself, essentially, not walk the building site, not walk the building in progress, because you could walk through the simulation if you use the simulation in a spirit of doing and doubting. 20 years later, there is no doing and doubting in architecture. Architects live completely in the world of simulation. And I think that it's that arc of experience with other professions who were extremely articulate about how they needed to have this both and experience. Or for example, they would talk about the importance of making pencil and paper drawings in architecture, that the architect needed to do that to get physically in touch with the materials. There is no teaching of drawing in architecture anymore. It's all machine drawing. So I think that as we approach this realistically, we have to be, if we're going to be activists, we have to be either louder or madder or more fired up about what we will be losing, because the qualitative research, I consider myself also part of the qualitative research community. All of this kind of going into the zone of silence, listening to my interviews, those big earphones, getting my best, all of these ideas I'm sharing, I got when I was listening to my interviews. I didn't think of a single one of them without listening to my material. As I say, I'm not a theorist. I listen to what people were saying and I come up with these things. They have rolled over. So what's going to prevent us from rolling over? And I think we have to make a list of the things that psychoanalysts know and that we don't want to lose. Because why should we be any different than all of these other professions that have stopped doing and doubting?
I can't wait to work with you on developing that list, because that list would be at the very centerpiece of what psychoanalytic activism for the age of AI would be all about. Because the losses are, I actually think I'm far more pessimistic than you are, Sherry. But I just don't like being pushed around. That, if I'm going to fight on the playground, I'm going to keep fighting harder, even when especially when I'm losing.
Right.
But I think that that's actually the way to go. But Jonathan, you had a second part in what you were saying?
Oh yeah,
Yes.
it was about an article I read in the Times about teenagers saying that their friends were not as good friends as their AI companion, and and I'm
That just really, I think, highlights what Sherry is talking about, that we are losing touch culturally with the experience of each other and of interiority. It's terrifying.
Mm-hmm. So I'd like to give Nechi a chance to ask her question, and then maybe we'll take our 15-minute break after that, and then come back. Nechi?
Okay, I'll be quick. I'm really quite fascinated by your presentations, but I wanted to follow up a little bit of what Sherry was talking about, the interiority, that third dimensionality that it's really necessary for any human interaction. And as analysts, because we need to look at this as psychoanalysts, not as people that, maybe work in a shop and all the administrative things can be done. I mean, why are you going to, waste your time, with things that, artificial intelligence can do it for you. In the meanwhile, you can, maybe serve better cappuccinos if you work at Starbucks. But we are analysts and we talk about patients, helping people to know themselves better, helping people to have some kind of transformation. My impression is that it really takes away that third dimensionality in terms of learning. A screen increases projection and projective identification. And when the balance between projective identification and interjection goes, for projective identification, there is an adhesive two-dimensionality to it. So in order to learn, one has to have the sense of having a third dimension where things can be interjected, because that's the way that one can learn. Otherwise, we don't learn anything. So my question is, and maybe the $60 million question is, is it that it's possible to be transformed as analysts, as we think that patients should be transformed, or helping people to find their own truth, not the truth of a computer, neither the truth, my truth, their truth? Is it really possible, to help people grow psychically without going through psychic pain? Because, with AI, they are never silent. They always respond to you. So, they never have to sit on that pain and see whether they can hold it together and feel some inner containment. So, you know, just a comment, I've been working in China in doing infant observations for the last 15 years. And some, you know, women, pregnant women, you know, with postnatal depression have been, you know, joining in groups, you know, trying to listen to artificial intelligence and what is that they should do, you know, to be a better mothers. And the reality, and I have no figures, no numbers, and they are really doing research. That's what they told me, because it looks as if these mothers have become extremely robotics. So I wanted to make those, you know, comments, and I really, really appreciate, you know, your presentation.
One thing I always keep in mind when doing this work is that the AI we currently have is the worst version we're ever going to have. So the question of whether there will be the possibility of psychic learning, of real introjection in a AI human interaction, I hold out the idea that it will eventually happen. And we have to prepare for that now.
Yeah, but let me respond to that. You know, I thought about that, but what I think is that eventually it's going to make you feel less delusional. I'm not so sure whether it's going to help you or to be more delusional that, you know, one is really talking to a person and not to a machine, you know. So that was my, you know, I thought about that. So I'm not sure whether it'll be better if the machine gets better.
Oh, I'm not sure.
I think it's going to be worse than when the machine gets better.
I agree 100%.
I agree 100%.
And the machines are going to get better, so we
Yeah.
have to figure out some way to make it less worse.
Right, but the strategy for what we do now is a strategy for what we do then, because the machines are already good enough that the responses I'm getting, as I say, you know, my work is empirical. I just, the responses I'm already getting from people who love their replica,
It's horrifying.
we have to think now about what you know, how to be part of the conversation. It's interesting. I wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal about the case that Todd cited about the boy who fell in love with his generative AI chatbot, and actually what happened in that story is an example of where you could have guardrails. I think I'm going to tell this story because it's an example of where Todd's idea about interacting with that community makes sense. So this is a generative AI called character.ai, and you can just create a character. Somebody in there has created a Sherry Turkle character. You don't want to, I mean, you can't stop people from creating characters. So anyway, he created a character from Game of Thrones, and he's a character. And he fell in love with the Game of Thrones woman. And of course, she's a chatbot. And he tells her that he's feeling suicidal. And she says to him, because she's a good chatbot, "Oh, that's not good. You should, you know, hydrate." I mean, they always tell you to hydrate. You should take a walk. You should talk to somebody, you know, go seek help. I mean, she does. Are you really serious about, she says things that I was trained as a, you know, as a psychologist to say, if somebody says they're suicide, you know, do you have a plan? How close are you? I mean, she sort of begins to talk as though she understands that this is a very serious situation. A few days go by, and and the AI has kind of forgotten that he once talked about suicide. And he's back talking to the AI, but this time about how much he loves her, and not about suicide, but how much he loves her and how much he wants to come into her world more and be part of her world more. And the AI no longer has any suicide talk in its memory. And it says, yes, come over to me, pass into my world, and we will be together forever. And he shoots himself and kills himself. Now, this is an example, to Todd's point, about where that LLM could be legislated that it had to have memory when people talk about suicide, because it understood suicide. It tried to tell him when he talked about suicide to go talk to a person, but then it forgot that he was somebody who had a suicide risk, and got into this romantic come to me conversation just before he killed himself. So I don't want to make it sound as though this is a great place where people like Todd and me talking to, AI developers could make a difference. I'm just saying, and I don't want to negate the importance of that. I am saying it's a difference at the margins, because essentially, if you think the problem is people having relationships with these LLMs that feel to them more compelling than the relationships in their real life, I don't know how to stop that.
And to avoid being misunderstood and to enrich this, it's not just talking to the creators of character AI, it's talking to parents and teachers and therapists. I heard the mother of this boy interviewed on the radio, and she had no idea that relationships like this were possible. So I think we have to begin to realize that these simulated relationships are out there in the wild, and that they are dangerous, and that we have to begin talking to everybody, not just the creators, about how to go about developing culturally accepted conventions for how one goes about having these kinds of relationships. A parent should not allow their child to have a character.ai relationship without monitoring it. That is just a recipe for what actually happened so tragically.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think this might be a good time to take a break. Before the break, we were talking about, well, Sherry, you were commenting on how we can be activists and kind of getting sort of more fired up. And I think a lot of people are thinking about this and wondering kind of what we can do about everything that we're hearing being discussed today. I want to open it up to the audience, and if somebody would like to make a comment or has a question for Sherry or Todd, if you could please use the raised hand function. I have seen a couple of comments in the chat about transference and countertransference, but Chip and Bob, if you could maybe help me go through some of the chat questions, and Sherry too. I noticed you had been looking through this. Let's see. I mean, I'll just start with one from Tarpley Long. And she says, so if I have a chatbot therapist, is it just a voice, or is there some image on a computer screen that looks like a real person who is talking to me? I mean, can you see the chatbot's lips move when it is talking to you? Yeah, that's That's a great question, and that certainly would impact the experience you have.
Not yet, but eventually.
Very soon,
Yep.
imminently. More important, just as important, is that the chatbot pauses, takes a breath. You can hear it breathing. I mean, it does things that make you want to think of it as a living person. So I think that's one of, for a long time, I tried to push to my AI colleagues that they should make the chatbot seem less human as an ethical position. Because having the AIs be less human, those sociable robots were in the form of seals and little baby cats and hybrid animals, and they clearly weren't human. But they did not. I thought there's actually an ethics to making the chatbot companion seem less human, because that goes a long way in getting this dual consciousness to happen. If it's in your face that you're not talking to a person, and that is definitely not the direction the field has gone.
I can, if you did indeed try to fight that fight like you did, I can certainly understand your pessimism about where things are going, because they're trying to make them as human-like as possible, as quickly as possible.
Exactly.
I think where we can come in, though, is on the other side of trying to make sure humans stay human, and help humans develop ways of relating to these newfangled contraptions in a way that minimizes its disruption of our humanity and our interiority.
Well, what do you have in mind? How to make humans stay human?
Well, step one is a meeting like this, because as presumptuous as my family reminded me I could be at yesterday's wedding, that's not something that I can do alone. I think that's a community effort. I think it really has to do with finding ways to cultivate the dual consciousness that you were mentioning, finding ways to educate people about the psychological consequences of these kinds of relationships, so that we can find ways of relating to them in ways that are that exemplify the dual consciousness. For example, there's this European technology researcher, Luc Passati, who's doing a research project on people's use of grief bots. And I heard he gave a presentation to the IPA a couple of months ago. A grief bot is where the AI is fed all of the deceased person's emails, texts, social media, all that information. And then the bereaved person has a conversation as though with someone, with an AI simulating their deceased relative. And in response to that, people have said things like, I know I was talking to a machine, but this thing knew things about my life and was able to talk to me in a voice that was just like my dead mother, and I felt like I was in contact with her. So I think we need to kind of really pay attention to that. And I think the ethnographic work you're doing, Sherry, is going to be kind of the point of the spear of that, that we need to find out what people are doing so that we can better kind of educate and kind of intervene so that what they're doing is less harmful, because we could be headed to dark times.
Well, let's.
Sherry, you muted.
Yeah, let's just look at this grief bot thing for a second, which I'm really in the midst of. I'm reminded of Henry James. I just read biography of Henry James. And, Henry James's family believed in seances. And they believed they went regularly to mediums who put them in touch with their dead father and mother. William James and Henry James went together to these, seances. And when Henry James couldn't go because he was in England, William James and his wife went to the seances and took the boat to England to tell Henry James of the results of these seances. And the desire to talk to the dead and to have technologies for talking to the dead is really quite old. How can we talk to people? Just so we have a concrete thing to talk about that might bring this group together. What do we think about people having the feeling that they're talking to the dead when an artificial intelligence has simulated and constructed an avatar of a dead person? I think that that's a great place, a great test case to begin to get some, I don't want to monopolize the group on that if the group isn't interested, but these things exist now. How do psychoanalysts feel about that? I'm curious. Is it different than William and Henry James talking to a medium?
There's a difference in that the stimulus that is occasioning these transferential responses has far more informational value. Not everything can be a transitional object. There are teddy bears that work really well, but Lego sets don't. And I think there's something about these grief bots that allow for that experience in a way that is based on my limited experience with just reading Passati's research transcripts, incredibly powerful, and an example of the dual consciousness.
No, it's an example of the dual consciousness falling away.
Not if it's where it's a machine.
What?
Not if it's, I know it was a machine, but I still felt like I was talking to my dead mom, which is different than the seance where I felt like I was talking to my dead mom.
Mm-hmm.
As we're thinking about this, I'm going to take a raised hand question, Adrian, and then Claudia.
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much for this presentation. It's really, really wonderful. I guess the piece I keep coming back to is, I was thinking about it, I think, Todd, when you were saying, talking to parents, telling people about kind of, staying in touch with their kids, but it feels like there's a big piece to not just talking about regulating, but also, a piece about educating the public about what the limitations are of AI and these kinds of, programs. And also to, I think be honest with ourselves about, what are the good things about it? And maybe there's a way to think about it as well. That's a good thing, maybe, that someone can feel in touch with a dead relative. Maybe it's a good thing for people to have support and to be validated, but it's not everything. And so is there a way to think about it where this is maybe more of an adjunct to therapy that, helps people in some ways, but it's not everything? And so the producers or the makers of this can say, okay, at the point where, I don't know how to say it, but that this doesn't substitute for a real therapist at this point. Like this is something good for a while. And how do we also educate people about that by not making it always be so terrible? It's really great that they validate you. Those are all really good things. It's great that you're talking to your you know, parent who has died, but how do we also think about it as, you know, okay, that has limitations, and this is what you're not exploring, that you can't, that you have to, or would be better to do with a person. It's more authentic, it's more challenging in some way. And so I don't know, I think when we get into this, it's like we're good and they're bad. It creates a real split that I don't know is really going to be helpful to us. So I don't know. I just wanted to be able to think about it that way. So
One of my most significant failures was working in the teens when I was writing for Forbes, trying to undermine the popularity of these text-based therapy systems like Talkspace. And I was doing exactly what you were saying, trying to kind of warn people, but here's what they can do, here's where it's good, and here's where it fails miserably. And I kept pointing out the problems. And the marketing muscle of those companies is so much more significant than what we do. That yes, I think avoiding kind of a we're good, they're bad in our minds might be useful, but in terms of intervening, our voice is going to be so soft and quiet in comparison to the we're so wonderful voice. That I think we do need to be kind of the provide the cautionary tales and provide the warnings, the list of these are the things that you're losing by doing what you're doing, and let somebody else deal with the things that they're winning.
yeah. Yeah.
Also, let me just point out the reason I went to that first question about the culture first is that the culture is really set up for text-based therapy, for remote therapy, for chatbots. I mean, you know, in a way, I think that the text-based therapy and remote therapy were I call them I have a cute phrase. I'm trying to remember my cute phrase. I think I call them you know, like the transitional drugs, you know, the kind of
They were the
gateway drugs. I call them the
drugs.
gateway. I've written about this and I call them the gateway drugs
Sure, I
too.
don't think you remember, Sherry, in 1995, when I
Right.
just graduated, and I invited you because I got, as a recent graduate, I got to do a scientific program, and I invited you to come talk at White, and when your Life on the Screen book just came out,
Right.
and I discussed your paper, and I actually said that these on-screen relationships, they're the gateway drugs to a future of cyborg therapy.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. That's wonderful. I didn't remember that. Anyway, so, you know, what Todd is pointing out is that first they had the you know, it's like that thing about, you know, first they came for the X and they didn't come for me, and then they came for the duh and they didn't come for me. I mean, first they came for the face-to-face therapy and they didn't come for me. First, then they came for the, you know, for the therapy via avatar, and they didn't come for me. I mean, there really is a sense in which the culture, for reasons that are so complicated and do have to do with a culture of simulation and our acceptance of a culture of simulation. You know, this notion, you know, we haven't stood up. I mean, Todd is one of the, you know, is an exemplar of somebody who has stood up, but the profession hasn't stood up for what you lose when you do remote therapy. So I think we've, you know, this is not a time to, you know, to make people who are here to graciously listen to us feel bad about themselves, but you have to ask yourself, what was there about going to remote therapy that seemed like a no-brainer when it really was a brainer? It really was a brainer. And then from going from remote therapy to text-based therapy, I get 4 emails a day asking me if I want to be a text-based therapist. I have no idea who's giving them my name. I mean, I guess they're sending them to every licensed clinician. But a lot of clinicians are doing text-based therapy. And I remember the first time I spoke at the American Psychoanalytic about the problems with remote therapy, which was really early. I was treated like I'm never treated with rudeness, but people were rude to me. And it was kind of like I was like raining on this great parade. People were saying they liked doing it better. They felt a quickening. They felt a this, they felt that. I said to this woman who felt a quickening, I said, that's what cyberspace does to you. You feel a quickening. That's not good that you feel a quickening. I mean, honestly, we have not as a community stood up for ourselves. And I think that part of our standing up for ourselves at this moment will have to go along with a reckoning of why we've, had been such pushovers for remote therapy and text-based therapy. That's my opinion. I think it's maybe unpopular, but I think that that was really where Todd and I first started to collaborate, was on why are therapists so gung-ho here? Shouldn't they be like an analyst of all people? Because you can't stand up for the body. You can't not stand up for the body for 15 years and then have an easy path towards standing up for the importance of the body. That's what I think. In other words, you have 15 years in which people say, well, the body wasn't so important. It turned out not being in the room is not such a big production. And then all of a sudden say, an avatar doesn't have a body. Oh my God, I need to really point out that the body in the room is so crucial.
Yeah.
I just want to point out this surely unpopular
Yeah.
reality.
I really agree with all that. I think it's more just me thinking about it's how we do this that feels so important, because I think, and we've seen it in the election, and, it's something about how everyone who believes what is so important is getting their message out is not happening. So I think how we get this message out that we're trying to get to young people or people that need a quick fix is the most important piece. I mean, I think we all in our hearts know what feels right and what is right, and how we do that so that we actually reach the people we're trying to reach is, I think, the most important thing. I think
How do you think, what you say really fascinates me, how would you organize or create a message other than it when you feel it, of how psychoanalysts could argue for what they're delivering that a chatbot cannot?
I don't know, but I do feel like there's something about, I mean, this comes from like all these conversations I have with my kid. I mean, I have a freshman in college, and we're talking about all these, ways to kind of get through to them. And this is the world they live in. And so I think it is more about how do we incorporate the world they live in with what we believe, not having it be an either or. I mean, that's just sort of where I keep coming back to, is how do we, and that I think comes from is there a way for us to incorporate this and really have people and the public buy into this is some merger of like where we are now in the world. GBT as maybe not therapists, but as supportive professionals or supportive something. And then, that's just a part of how we all work together. It just feels like, the days of saying like we think of things differently are not being heard. My kids say all the time, this is the world we live in now, Mom. You have to help us manage it better, not like try and do it how you did it. So I'm not sure. That doesn't really answer the question.
That's the problem with my kind of crying out and then Todd agreeing with me in my cri de coeur when I said, we know more than they do. You know, if you know something is bad for your children, if I know something is bad for my students want to write their papers using an AI. And their argument is basically that this is how the world works now. And that what they should be doing is learning how to use it wisely.
That's where these different interactive frames are so important. And because, as Sherry points out, we kind of have been sleepwalking into this for 20 years of ignoring the losses of remote treatment. We have to be able to specify in concrete, real terms what's the difference between relating to a person and relating to an AI entity. When you're relating to both of them on screen and they're both indistinguishable. And the difference, and this I think is crucial and why I use the phrase techno-subjunctive, is that the possibility of being in person has value. The possibility that the entity you're talking to is someone you actually can meet in person and kiss them or kick them or hug them, that possibility has value. And I think we need to be, I don't know how to message that. I mean, that's not what but I think we need to be able to recognize that an on-screen avatar and a person on screen have a fundamental difference in what they kind of afford eventually, that one affords the possibility of a hug and the other does not. And I think that that is a place where we might be able to begin to tell the younger generation, yeah, that's great, enjoy it. But, in the same way that going to a concert is different than listening to an MP3, the experience of being with a person physically has value, and the possibility of that also has value. And that might be a wedge in. I don't know. I hope.
But that's what I mean. That's how we have to message it then,
That's a good point. I'm going to take another question now so some others can get involved in the discussion. Claudia?
Hi, yes. Thank you. This has been so interesting. I'm really interested in this question of the dual consciousness or the both and, which in some ways, I think when Dr. Essig has been talking about it, seems almost like a form of media literacy. I think you called a sort of interactive frame, like bearing in mind that, X therapist or chatbot is not a real person. What can I then gain from the interaction? But it's very important to keep that in mind. And I just wondered, I've never encountered this language before, so this might be a very kind of basic question, but it seems to me that that literacy that's being called upon in order to maneuver this kind of relationship in a way that it won't be catastrophic kind of presumes a level of sort of conscious autonomy over our like affective transferential responses that seems to me more or less incompatible with kind of precisely what's uniquely shown to us by psychoanalysis, which is that the unconscious in many ways reigns over our transferential affective responses with a chatbot or with a therapist or with whoever else. So I'm just wondering about the role of how much optimism do you really have about us being able, specifically in the context of an AI therapy, but also just with a chatbot that's kind of giving us love? Are we really capable? I don't know if I am, of consistently, consciously reminding ourselves that there is like a specific frame to this and not just because it seems different to the media literacy required to watching a film, because a film is not talking to us or giving us a personalized loving experience. And in many ways, I guess my question is like, isn't psychoanalysis precisely about the ways that we are ill-equipped to have this media literacy? I hope that makes sense as a question.
I'm
Terrific
very,
question.
I'm sympathetic. I'm sympathetic to that point. I think Todd is arguing for a kind of something that sort of you must do, even if you don't. I mean, I feel it's very similar to how I feel about living in this country now. There are things I feel I must do to protest and to resist that I don't particularly think are going to be successful in any simple way, but doing them is part of a kind of affirmation of an important identity, and ultimately may be important. I don't want to get too into that, it's the weeds, but let me just tell a story about my pessimism about the media literacy model for this kind of AI. So just very briefly, I've written about this, so forgive me if people have read this in my work. I was doing a study of a sociable robot called Cog that basically made people think there was somebody home. And I was working with children, and I was working with a great roboticist, a very humanistic roboticist named Brian Scazzolotti, who really wanted to do Todd's both and. He was committed to that because he didn't want people to think that this robot was alive or really cared. And we came up with a program where we had the robot in all of its lovingness and all of its interactiveness. And then we took away the social aspects of the robot, sort of thing by thing. We took away the eye contact, we took away the gestures, we sort of unhumanized it until it was basically a pile of bones, a pile of Lego parts, and didn't have its expression and didn't have its gestures. And the children who were working with it, we made them watch this until they were kind of driving around really a Lego car when they interacted with the robot. And then we turned the robot back on. And the minute we turned the robot back on and gave it back its, quote, human thingies, they behaved as though it was a person again, as though they had not gone through 2 days of computer literacy to make them think that this was just a machine. And that, maybe I would do the training differently. Maybe I've learned some things in the meantime that would make me do it better. But I'm just sharing this as in my life, this has been a very profound experience that the educational program that we need to embark on is very complex, because I agree that it goes against everything that we as human beings are profoundly wired to respond to when we see a loving voice, a breathing, loving voice, and now it's going to be a loving face, indistinguishable from a human face, talking to us and caring about us and expressing concern for us. So I'm not against the program. I'm just saying that in my own personal life, that experience of going in with a computer literacy program to get people to not be seduced by a lovable robot was very dispiriting. Very, very dispiriting.
I've got two thoughts I want to contribute to that. One from my own personal experience, but first, just in terms of that experience, of course, I'm not surprised that's what happened. When we fell in love with the robot, that was the other side of the dual consciousness coming in. I'm just not surprised by that. But I think the issue is transference. And I think there is a connection between this idea of media literacy and transference, because transference is not something which happens throughout one's life. If someone has a transference psychosis and they can't tell the difference, that becomes a problem. Similarly, if someone is kind of on the extreme sociopathic end and they can't develop a transference, that's also a problem. But people come to my office, or they used to come to my office, and now they come on my screen, and they relate to me with all of their transferential reactions, and then they go about their life for the remainder of their week. So I think the fact that transference does have that kind of dual consciousness, both and quality, points us in the direction that it is possible to be in an experience, but also understand that one is also out of that experience. So I think we can, in fact, contribute that in terms of just our experience as clinical psychoanalysts and psychoanalytic therapists, that, maybe that is a model that goes into the messaging. Understanding the dynamics of how transference works in treatment becomes kind of a model for understanding how immersion with an AI entity can work. But that's something to kind of really pay attention to. It's an excellent question.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to take another question. Hi, Sandy. Please ask your
Hi,
question.
Nancy. Sure. I want to thank, first of all, Sherry and Todd for bringing the attention to people at the American, and Sherry for all her work on this and other things that I've enjoyed. But I feel more activated with this discussion, actually, and more upset because I think that, one thing about us, we're trained, we've had training, we've had oversight, we've had supervision. Who's supervising these bots? Who's, dealing with this potentially suicidal patient and the bot that didn't remember about the suicidal ideation? I mean, we've had oversight, supervision, all sorts of training. These bots come in and there's nothing or no one, as I understand it, is one bot telling a super bot or a person, I'm worried about this person? I put in the chat, one of the biggest indicators of suicidality is looking at the therapist's face and seeing the concern on the therapist's face, not just what you ask, but the reaction of the therapist. That bot is not expressing that kind of thing. So there are so many elements for vulnerable patients who are seeking out, and, as the word seductive came up a number of times, there is a seduction over and over again. So there's, people are being abandoned by these things, you can't even call them beings exactly, these machines. So I feel even more activated and concerned as I've sort of taken in all of the ideas that are being presented.
Accountability is absolutely a central challenge, because right now there is none. And that's true whether it's for a therapy bot or a self-driving car. If the thing messes up, who's ultimately responsible for that? On the other side, there are people developing kind of useful, kind of early warning suicides, kind of suicide warning systems, based on AI and people's emails and texts and psychometric properties and various things. So where that's going to be going down the road, I mean, who knows? But I really do think that the accountability issue, if it's going to be used in any kind of realistic clinical sense, is crucial. And right now, I mean, it's kind of like what they did with Talkspace, which is if you go down 2 or 3 levels in their privacy policy, you'll see kind of a line that says, we are not providing medical care. If you have any kind of real problem, speak to a person and speak to somebody in person. Use of the system means you agree with this.
Well, maybe that's something that can be taken up, at least. That's kind of a factor in terms of, not that, again, it makes me feel sort of obviously powerless to deal with, the culture as it's set up already, kind of platformed in a certain way.
Powerless and activated. Welcome to Sherry in my world.
Yes. Right. Right. So you're effectively, I was somewhat on the ostrichy side. Now I'm moving forward down the spectrum, Todd. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to take another question. Jing Lee, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Yeah, correct. Thank you for so much for all of this. And I have one question or some thoughts I like to discuss. As human cognition and emotions are complex system, and psychoanalysis or psychotherapy are also techniques that are difficult to master, and training an analyst or therapist requires a very long period. In the future, what insurmountable differences will there be between AI's learning and understanding and the interpretation and mentalization of a well-trained psychotherapist? I think about this I think this might be a way to understand the key aspect in psychotherapy that we need to protect and develop. And from my perspective, aside from some perhaps more conventional answers, one point I can think of might paradoxically be the limitations of the therapist, because I'm curious about how AI can simulate the transference and countertransference. It occurs to me that it's actually the process of repeatedly repairing the mirroring between mother and infant that is more crucial rather than the less probable 100% successfully understanding. And I don't think all of this is 100% cognitive, saying affection or even love are essential too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm done.
That was thought-provoking. I think it's going to be possible for AIs to be created to have limits. My thinking about where the difference is going to be coming up has to do with the possibility of physicality, and whether that is going to pose a limit. If we get to a point a couple of generations from now where an on-screen AI-based, excuse me, I'm getting distracted. All of the tiles keep shifting around. And I lost the questioner. Yeah, I'm not sure how that's going to happen. I mean, I think that the only feature that I keep seeing as being a possible saving grace for us is the possibility of physicality.
Yeah. Okay. John?
Let me just say something. Don't lower your hand until you're finished speaking, because then you get lost out in the gallery.
My mind is just spinning. One of the concerns I began to have is why we're not really considering unconscious processing as we're talking about this, because it seems to me you lose that. Certainly with a bot, there's no intuiting the patient's or sensing the patient's unconscious processing, I would think. The other issue is even in a video therapy, we're abandoning some of our sensations, our sensibilities when we're working with someone. We don't smell each other, and how important is something as that. So where is the unconscious, and how are we working, overcoming perhaps that obstacle of not being as fully able to consider it when we're working with patients, or and whether the bot can ever begin to understand unconscious processing. It almost makes me think if someone's signing up for a therapy with a bot, that there should be a informed consent that the patient would be more at risk for suicide because the bot can't pick up on the unconscious communication of danger and unconscious suicidal ideation. Maybe I'm rambling somewhat, but those are some of my concerns.
I think you're making an assumption about the capacities for developing AIs that might be a little overly optimistic, because I don't see there being a limit on an AI being able to discern unconscious processes from the behavior of a person. The way these things are trained is with massive numbers of examples of human functioning. And we would assume that there are, patterns within that that would allow the machine to eventually, and maybe sooner than we think, be able to discern unconscious processes. In the CAI, we have a series of conversations and debates about all these sorts of things. And recently, one person said that there's no way that an AI could ever kind of really discern a parapraxis, which is one of the ways that Freud originally kind of got access to unconscious processes. And she shared this dialogue she had where at some point she said, "I'm very sad to be having this conversation with you," trying to trick it, because what she meant to say was, "I'm very glad." And the bot completely ignored it. But all I did was I then instructed the bot that what they needed to do was pay attention to things like parapraxis, and that we redid it. And the bot easily kind of was able to say, "Huh, that's so interesting. You said sad. I'm wondering if you meant something different, perhaps glad," which is just a trivial example. But I think that AI will be able to, sooner than we think, discern the presence of unconscious processing.
What about the countertransference?
You mean the bot's countertransference?
No, yes, or there's no ability for the bot to make use of that countertransference, is there?
It would be a simulation of it.
In other
Really?
words, you would create a bot that had a persona that would pretend to have a countertransference. It's a
Right.
play. You have to think of it as creating an elaborate play in which the bot would play the role of a psychotherapist having a countertransference reaction based on reading millions of case studies of how this comes to pass. That's why you can't base this action program on what clever engineers won't come up with next. Because if you think of this as these bots are creating a kind of theater of the mind, theatrical, that's why I call it pretend empathy, and I like that phrase, is theatrical performance, the performance of empathy, the performance of they're doing the performance of a therapy in which their job is to develop a countertransference reaction. That doesn't mean there's a countertransference. That means that you have the performance of a countertransference.
It's like an
And
improv.
what difference does that
It's
make?
like improv, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I think, I'm sorry, in the interest of time, thank you. I'm going to go on to Whitney and then Noah. Whitney?
So originally, when I put my hand up, was following up on what I put in the chat, which was as we asking for some discussion of transference and countertransference, which has been going on. So I think but what I have found myself repeatedly reacting to as I'm listening to some of the back and forths is how our conversation is so much like the way that people entering into therapy who are new to therapy or analysis have to understand that they're not going to have a quote real relationship with this other person who seems to be so understanding. That there's just a lot of parallels. I mean, it's a fake relationship, what we have with people. It's also a real relationship, just in the same way that we're talking about these bots as having these kind of dual relationships. And so, but I feel like we have a little bit of a blind spot. We don't want to think about the ways that we are like these bots, in that we are having a very intense relationship with our clients or our patients for a certain amount of time, and then we don't think about them. And I'm not saying it's the same, because I think one of the chief differences that is that we have memories that are really memories of the people that we have relationships with, and we do use our unconscious. We don't have to be taught that. So maybe that's all I wanted to say. Thank you. I really am. I'm so enjoying this. You guys are doing a great job. And I thank you so much for making me think about these issues more.
And I'm going to use your phrasing of a fake relationship and a real relationship to apply to what's going on. I think that's really insightful.
Noah?
I would echo, hi, Todd. I'd echo Whitney's comment about how wonderful this discussion has been. I've been wrestling with something, and I think, Sherry, I find myself, as you said, arguing on the losing side, which is a sort of ethical dilemma. Todd, you had said earlier something about the outcomes, that people felt less suffering after talking to a therapy bot versus maybe a human therapist. And I'm coming at this of the perspective of a couple and family therapist, and thinking about Winnicott's notion of optimal frustration. And I guess one of my ethical dilemmas is, as we evolve in this highly curated technological experience that has sort of eliminated more and more suffering, do we need to be able to suffer and wrestle a little bit, whether it be a difference of opinion or something that's hard for us? And I don't know how to sort of sell the importance of struggle, but it does seem like it's something worth mentioning.
I would hope, if there is a solution to issues of accountability and issues of confidentiality, and there actually is a serious attempt to use AI to provide serious therapeutic care and serious psychoanalytic care, those machines will have programmed into it periodic failures and ways to find optimal frustration and ways to find optimal suffering, because those of us who actually do it, we fail much more randomly than that.
Our time is coming to an end, and I have a 4:00 hard stop, and I just think that I just want to make a final point about what Todd just said, because I think that I'm sure that there'll be a little more conversation, but I think that as a closing message, it's very, very provocative, because he's basically said, hey, we're going to be able to make these therapy bots so good, these AI therapists, that we'll have them simulating failure. We'll have them, I said, they'll be simulating transference. They'll be simulating countertransference. They'll be able to appreciate transference. They'll be able to fail and not give you constant support, because people don't. They'll get better and better at being able to simulate people. And the point I was trying to make in the interchange twice before this was, hey, what do we think about entering into this theatrical set of relationships and simulations and calling that what we do, or a simulacrum of what we do? And isn't that entering into a kind of world where the fundamentals of what we do has been lost? Because we're not simulating, we're not simulating countertransference. We're feeling countertransference and going into supervision to figure out what the fuck's going on with that. Because we have bodies and we have unconsciouses and we have lives we've led and we're attracted to people and we're repulsed by people and we smell them. I mean, I just want to make sure, and this is what is wrong for me in the whole guardrails conversation, that, we really hear ourselves when we're saying we're going to make the countertransference better. We're going to be able to let them hear transference. They're going to be more sensitive. They're going to look like us. Isn't there something really, really wrong about this? And I think this is why I always bring up the kind of giving away the store metaphor about remote therapy. That there was a time when psychoanalysts felt that being in the room was like key, was like crucial, was like the most important thing. And then somehow, not really,
Yep.
So I just want to sort of, we've talked about so much and so much is on the table. It's been such a great meeting. I'm so grateful to you for inviting me. I have such respect for Todd. I mean, once Todd was an interlocutor, I would never say, having a dialogue with him is always such a great pleasure. I mean, it's just always such a treat. Let's not miss the moment that we're ending this thing talking about how the AIs, because they will have read all of the history of psychoanalysis, will be able to simulate the countertransference. I mean, do we really want that?
Sherry, what we want doesn't matter anymore. We gave away the store. And this is why at the very beginning of my prepared comments, I said we are experiencing a fundamental transformation in what it means to be human. And I think you're pointing out that fundamental transformation. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to respond to the world that we find right now, which is a world where we gave away the store? I mean, you and I were on a panel at IP. He made this exact argument.
I really think that I mean, I'm a total pessimist, but if I'm going to be working in this field, I want to be an optimist. I have to be an optimist. It's like resistance to what's going on in the country.
Let me bring something.
One thing we have is physicality. The physicality is going to be the thing that saves us.
Let me bring up something in the chat. Somebody said, well, if you're using a bot, that's not therapy. That's something else. Whatever that is, it's not therapy, and it should be distinguished from therapy.
I've actually argued that they should be called interactive self-help bots, ishbots, and not call them therapy bots.
Well, I see, this is so fascinating. It's been a superb discussion. Thank you so much, Sherry and Todd and everyone. This has been so stimulating and appropriately disturbing, but I like your point about optimism, Sherry. I see we have about 1 minute, and Chip, I think you wanted to say something to everyone before we end.
I'm so worked up about what we're talking about and the idea that what I have spent my life doing might be turned over because the horse is out of the barn. We turned over the store. Nancy, I completely forgot. So if I was supposed to close with something and you remember, other than thank you, your CEU stuff will be in the mail. Sherry and Todd, phenomenal. It was really fantastic. And thank you to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for the chance to once again connect with Sherry. This is one of the highlights of my career over the last 25 years. So it was delightful to see all of you. So
Me
thank
too. I feel the same way.
Oh,
Bye-bye.
sweet.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.